The fluorescent lights hummed overhead like distant machinery, the same pitch they'd held for 18 years, and Rachel Torres moved through them as if she'd learned to become invisible to their glare. She clipped her temp badge to scrubs that fit like borrowed skin, the plastic rectangle catching the cold stainless steel glint of the supply cart she pushed past Trauma Bay 3. The smell of antiseptic and stale coffee layered thick in the air, the particular cocktail of St. Michael's Emergency Department at 6:24 a.m., before the chaos arrived, when the hospital still belonged to night shift nurses who understood the value of silence. Her hands were steady as she checked the debriding supplies in Bay 2. Steady as they'd been in Marja. Steady as they'd need to be today. Rachel had worn uniforms before. This scrub set was just another costume, another way to disappear into a role that required nothing more than competence and the kind of tactical awareness that came from learning to read a room the way others read monitors. The temp agency had processed her paperwork in 48 hours. 3 references checked out clean, each one answering calls from a number that had been disconnected for 6 months. No one asked questions. No one suspected that a woman pushing a supply cart through the ER corridor was anything other than what her badge declared, just a nurse. Just a nurse. Those words had a way of traveling through hospitals like a virus. Just a nurse meant forgettable. Just a nurse meant the attending physicians wouldn't remember her face. Just a nurse meant she could move through the place collecting information, watching the 3rd floor ICU, monitoring the patient in the corner room whose medical chart had been flagged in a Pentagon brief 3 months ago. Just a nurse meant her mission could proceed undetected. Dr. Marcus Whitfield arrived at 7:13 a.m. in a charcoal suit that cost more than Rachel's entire monthly housing allowance. He moved through the emergency department the way a predator moves through claimed territory, slow, certain, radiating the kind of institutional authority that came from a medical degree, a tenured position, and a family name that appeared on the hospital's founding board. His shoes clicked against the tile floor with a rhythm that demanded attention. Everything about Whitfield announced control, the way his residents scattered when he approached, the way nurses at the desk straightened their posture, the way the charge nurse called out bay assignments as if asking permission. He was 53 years old. Married twice. Never been questioned in the way that mattered. His college roommate sat on the hospital board. His name appeared in the CME donor plaques mounted in the 4th floor conference room. For 27 years, Dr. Marcus Whitfield had been the unremarkable kind of untouchable, not famous enough to worry about public accountability, too embedded to face any real consequences. Rachel had read his file 4 times. She stayed in her lane, moving supplies, checking oxygen tanks, keeping her presence the kind of white noise that filled every hospital. She watched him conduct rounds from a distance, watched him order tests with the absolute certainty of a man who had never been wrong, or at least had never been corrected. His residents followed him like remirers, taking notes, laughing at jokes that weren't funny, absorbing the subtle message that their value existed only in his approval. The construction worker arrived at 8:22 a.m. via ambulance. 74-year-old male with a crush injury to his left forearm, a concrete wall had collapsed during a renovation project in North Star. The paramedics had gotten him packaged and rolling in under 12 minutes. He was conscious, in pain, but stable enough that he moved from the ambulance stretcher to Trauma Bay 4 without drama. His name was Michael Chen. According to his chart, he'd been in the army once, a long time ago. Rachel was assigned to assist Dr. Whitfield on the closure. Of course she was. Whitfield controlled the assignment board the way he controlled everything else, and Rachel had made the mistake of asking a question during morning report about triage protocol, something that challenged his methodology in front of the residents. He'd smiled when she asked it. That smile meant retaliation. The wound required meticulous work. The concrete had shattered the skin in an irregular pattern, leaving tissue damage that extended past the obvious laceration. Subcutaneous tissue was compromised. The muscle beneath showed contamination from the construction site. Most nurses would have simply assisted, handing instruments, supporting Whitfield's work. Rachel knew what the work demanded before she even saw the exposed tissue. She prepped the bay without being asked. Gathered the fine-gauge sutures, the instruments for lead closure, the irrigation solution that would matter more than anything Whitfield could do with his hands. Whitfield gave her a look, that same smile, and said nothing. He wanted to show the residents something. He wanted to demonstrate mastery. That was fine. Rachel could work around ego. The procedure took 98 minutes. Whitfield began with his usual efficiency, handling the initial debridement while Rachel irrigated and suctioned, her movements measured and precise. But when he reached the moment where most physicians would close in 2 layers and call it complete, Rachel had already prepared the setup for a 3-layer closure. Fascia. Subcutaneous. Dermis. The kind of work that required hands steady enough to place sutures that wouldn't compromise blood flow or create areas where infection could hide. Whitfield handed off the closure work to himself. He always did. But the moment he tried to seat the first subcutaneous stitch, his hand angle was wrong. The needle would have left microgaps. Rachel, standing across the bay, simply repositioned the retractor without being asked, shifting the angle of the wound so that his approach became impossible. He needed to adjust. He adjusted. The closure took another 42 minutes. Whitfield's residents took notes and said nothing, but Rachel had caught the moment when his attending realized the subcutaneous work was going to take precision he didn't possess. He handed the suture to her. "I want to see your closure technique." Rachel took the needle without comment. The first stitch went in with the kind of control that came from hands trained on trauma medicine in active zones, from muscle memory that had threaded tissue under mortar fire in Marja. 3-0 suture. Perfect spacing. Perfect tension. The kind of work that didn't leave scarring. The kind of work that told a story if anyone was paying attention. She didn't look at Whitfield. She didn't acknowledge his stare. She simply worked, her hands moving through the familiar choreography, completing the subcutaneous layer before moving to the dermal closure with the same mechanical precision. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The heart monitor beeped steady rhythm from the adjacent bay. The irrigation fluid dripped in its careful patter against stainless steel. When it was finished, Mr. Chen's forearm looked like it had been closed by someone who'd done this work in places where complications meant death. The scarring would be minimal. The function would be perfect. Whitfield was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. Then he told the residents, "Watch how that's done. That's the standard." He left the bay without looking at Rachel again, but she could feel his attention like a pressure change in the air. She'd just demonstrated something he couldn't explain in a way that protected his authority. Michael Chen opened his eyes as she was finishing the bandage work. His gaze tracked her hands, the way the dressing secured without being too tight, the way every movement served the healing. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said it softly, almost as a question, the way someone speaks a name they haven't heard in years. "Where do you serve?" Rachel's hands didn't hesitate. She kept working, kept her voice level, kept every visible sign locked behind the mask. "I'm just a nurse, Mr. Chen." But he knew better. His eyes had seen that kind of work before, the same kind of precision that only existed in people who'd learned to save lives in the worst possible circumstances. He was still studying her face when she stepped back from the bay, moving through the fluorescent light toward her next assignment, toward invisibility, toward the work that still needed doing. "Special Forces, right?" he called after her, not quite a question. Rachel didn't turn around. She didn't answer. She simply disappeared into the corridor, into the rhythm of the hospital, into the role she'd built so carefully that nobody, except maybe a man who'd already lived through his own wars, could see the weight she carried in the way she moved. But Dr. Whitfield had seen something too. And he was the kind of man who hated not understanding things, the kind of man who couldn't tolerate someone in his hospital who operated at a level he couldn't access. Rachel moved through the halls of St. Michael's with the efficiency of someone who had learned to disappear into the architecture itself. The temp badge clipped to her scrubs caught the fluorescent light as she passed the residence lounge, where Dr. Whitfield stood with 14 medical students gathered around him like disciples. He didn't glance at her as she walked past. He didn't need to. He was already setting the trap. The next morning, grand rounds. Whitfield stood at the front of the conference room, her charts projected on the screen behind him in letters large enough that the entire audience could read her documentation failures. "This," he said, tapping her patient file with a laser pointer, "is inadequate assessment. Incomplete vital sign documentation. No baseline neurological exam." He paused. "Let that sink in. This is what we don't accept at St. Michael's. Standards exist for a reason." One of the residents scribbled notes. Another glanced at Rachel, who stood in the back of the room in her scrubs, listening. Her jaw moved once, a single clench so subtle that only someone looking for it would see it. Her hands remained steady at her sides. She didn't look away from Whitfield. She didn't look down. She simply waited, her face showing nothing while the chief of emergency medicine used her as the negative example for 7 minutes straight. When grand rounds ended, she headed to the vending machine in the break room. The coffee maker had been broken for 3 days. She needed caffeine, needed something to do with her hands that wasn't holding back a response. The machine hummed as she inserted her dollar bills. Whitfield appeared in the doorway like a predator who had caught the scent of something wounded. He wasn't alone. 2 residents trailed behind him, whispering among themselves. "You know," Whitfield said, his voice carrying that particular tone of false concern that made it worse, "most nurses from the major hospitals in San Antonio have years of institutional training. They understand protocol. They understand hierarchy." He smiled. "I wonder sometimes what temp agencies are actually scraping up these days. Must be difficult to meet our standards when you've never worked in a real hospital system before." The vending machine released her selection. The bag of coffee fell with a soft thud. Rachel retrieved it. Her movements were precise, economical, completely unaffected. She didn't turn to face him. She didn't dignify the comment with a response. She simply opened the bag, inhaled the dark roasted smell, and prepared her coffee as if Whitfield had said nothing at all. One of the residents looked embarrassed. The other found sudden interest in his phone. Whitfield's smile tightened. He had thrown the insult into the water and watched for ripples. There were none. "You know what your real problem is?" Whitfield continued, unable to let it go. "You move like you've done this before, like you think you understand emergency medicine. But you're just a traveler. Just someone passing through." He stepped closer. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. "You question protocols. You suggest improvements. You stand out. And standing out in my department means your work is being watched. Scrutinized. If I find one more documentation failure, one more patient note that doesn't meet standards, I will have security escort you out personally. Am I clear?" It wasn't a request. It was a command. Rachel set down her coffee cup. She turned to face him. For 3 seconds, nothing moved. Not her expression. Not her breathing. Not a single muscle in her face that would give him what he wanted, which was proof that she could be broken. Her eyes met his with the kind of calm that comes from having already survived worse things than humiliation. "Crystal clear, doctor," she said quietly. 7 words. No anger. No defensiveness. No tremor. Just acknowledgement. Just compliance. Just a temp nurse understanding her place in the hierarchy. Whitfield turned and left, the residents trailing behind him like remoras following a shark. Rachel picked up her coffee. The warmth of the cup was grounding. She brought it to her lips, and for just a moment, alone in the break room, she allowed herself one breath that was something other than even. The next 72 hours passed in careful documentation. Every patient note was pristine. Every vital sign recorded twice. Every assessment expanded beyond what protocol required. Whitfield watched her work and found nothing. This infuriated him more than if she had faltered. She was supposed to break. They always broke. The ones who arrived with something to prove, the ones who couldn't understand that hospitals ran on hierarchy and history and the kind of power that couldn't be challenged without consequences, they all eventually cracked under sustained pressure. But this temp nurse moved through St. Michael's like water, bending around obstacles, absorbing his attacks without resistance, and somehow still getting her work done better than the permanent staff. What he couldn't see was what happened in the ICU on the third night. The construction worker from the ER, the Army medic who had watched her surgical closure with professional recognition, was in Bay 6 recovering from a post-operative infection. Rachel arrived for her rounds at 2:13 a.m. The night shift was light. Only 2 other nurses on the floor. The patient's monitor showed irregular rhythm. Not alarm level yet. But wrong. She approached his bed. His oxygen saturation was holding at 92%. His heart rate was elevated. His skin temperature had risen 0.8 degrees in the last 4 hours. How long? She asked the night nurse quietly. Started about an hour ago. I was going to call the resident. Rachel's hands moved before her mind caught up. She checked the fall line. The antibiotic drip. He's wound site. The infection was migrating systemically. Sepsis. Early stage. The night nurse watched her work with growing confusion because Rachel wasn't moving like a temp nurse anymore. She was moving like someone who had done this 1,000 times because she had. Her hands knew the rhythm. Her eyes knew what to look for. She had muscle memory written into the very fiber of her being. Page the resident, Rachel said. Tell him we need blood cultures, lactate level, and a broad-spectrum antibiotic coverage. Say it exactly like that. Tell him it's for the construction worker in 6. The night nurse hesitated for exactly 1 second, then obeyed. In that second of hesitation was something like recognition, like seeing a reflection in a mirror that didn't match the person's face. But it wasn't quite time yet. Not quite close enough to the moment when the real nightmare would arrive and force every truth to the surface. Rachel didn't know that. Dr. Whitfield didn't know that. And the security guard who would later stand at attention when he heard her rank was still sitting in the lobby scanning his phone, completely unaware that his entire understanding of the hospital's hierarchy was about to be rewritten in real time. The night stretched on. The monitors beeped their steady rhythm. And in the ICU at St. Michael's, a temp nurse with worn combat boots hidden in her locker continued moving through the dark hours like a ghost, saving lives that no one would ever know needed saving. The waiting room at St. Michael's had the particular silence of 11 p.m. on a Tuesday, fluorescent lights casting everything in that shade of institutional white that made blood look darker than it actually was. Rachel moved between chairs with a stack of patient charts, her scrub still damp from the ICU where she'd spent the last 4 hours stabilizing a post-op sepsis case that should have coded at 2:06 a.m. but didn't. Her worn combat boots made no sound against the tile. She'd learned long ago how to move through spaces without occupying them. The doors burst open at 11:43 p.m. A man. 6'5", maybe 270 pounds, his pupils dilated to the size of dimes. PCP. The kind of high that erased pain receptors and replaced them with pure animal aggression. His shirt was torn at the shoulder where something had caught fabric, and his right hand gripped a tire iron like it was an extension of bone. He screamed, not words at first, just a raw sound that made 3 patients flinch backward in their chairs. I need it. Give me the drugs. Now. The waiting room went dead silent. Security guard number 1, Thompson, a former construction worker with a bad knee, stepped forward from his post by the entrance. The attacker turned toward him and raised the tire iron. Thompson's hands came up in what he probably thought was a defensive posture. It was actually a surrender posture. He took 3 steps backward. The second guard, Rodriguez, was already moving toward the administrative office with his radio in hand. Behind the nurse's station, Dr. Whitfield stood with a patient chart in his hands. His eyes tracked the attacker for maybe 2 seconds. Then he turned and walked through the sliding door into the back hallway. Just turned and walked. No code called. No staff alerted. No attempt to direct anyone to safety. He simply removed himself from the problem. Rachel was standing 12 feet from the attacker when he turned his attention to the nursing station itself, probably looking for whatever pharmaceutical treasure he'd convinced himself lived in the drawers back there. His feet started moving that direction. The tire iron was raised at shoulder height, ready to swing at anything that got in his way. She didn't calculate. Calculation took time. This was something older than thought, muscle memory from Marja, from the dusty courtyard at FOB Shank where she'd learned that hesitation was the same as bleeding out. Her body simply moved. For strides. Her approach angle put her perpendicular to his swing arc. As he began the motion, that fatal commitment to the downstroke, she stepped inside his reach, got her right hand under his wrist, and used his own momentum against him like he was a door swinging on its hinges. The tire iron flew from his grip. His body followed the trajectory of his arm, his center of gravity suddenly no longer his own. Rachel pivoted once, dropping her knee toward the floor while converting his forward motion into a spiral that would have impressed a submission wrestling coach. His face hit the tile first. The breath exploded out of him. Before he could inhale, Rachel had his left arm locked behind his back at an angle that wasn't quite breaking but was close enough that his brain registered the message clearly, "Don't move." Her knee planted precisely on his spine, just above the lumbar vertebrae, not crushing, but present. Certain. The kind of pressure that said she could increase it any time she wanted. 7 seconds. Maybe 8. Stay flat. Don't move. Don't breathe hard, she said. Her voice had dropped an octave. Not a request. It was a command, the same tone she'd used in the field when giving orders to combat medics under fire. Rodriguez, call police. Tell them he's restrained and secured but he'll need medical evaluation for substance use. Probable synthetic cathinones. Rodriguez stared at her for approximately 2 seconds. His radio was already in his hand. Oh yeah. Got it. The attacker made a noise, something between a growl and a sob, the sound of a body flooded with synthetic dopamine that was suddenly running into the brick wall of someone who knew exactly how much pressure it took to make someone comply without causing permanent damage. Rachel kept her eyes forward, her breathing steady, her hands exactly where they were. How long? She asked Rodriguez, still looking at the attacker beneath her. Police dispatch says 8 minutes. Traffic. Light this time of night. Good. She shifted her weight just slightly, and the attacker made a different sound, the one that meant the message had been received. Rachel's composure didn't flicker. Someone get a chair for Thompson. Rodriguez, stay on the line with dispatch. If he moves, tell them. No one moved for the first 3 seconds. Then the waiting room came back to life like a dam breaking, a nurse pushing a chair toward Thompson, who was still standing there with his hands half raised like he was still defending himself against an attack that had never quite landed. Another nurse peeked through the sliding doors toward the back hallway where Dr. Whitfield had retreated. A patient in the corner started filming on her phone. Rachel kept her knee pressed against the attacker's spine. Her hand steady. Her breathing controlled. In her peripheral vision, she could see the construction worker from the ER, the former army medic, standing in the waiting room doorway, watching her with the kind of recognition that meant something had shifted. He was looking at her the way he'd looked at her during the 3-layer closure, like he'd just seen something he wasn't supposed to see. 7 minutes passed. The attacker stopped moving. The synthetic high was starting to burn off, replaced by the slow-motion panic of someone realizing they'd made a very specific kind of mistake. Rachel didn't move. Didn't ease pressure. Didn't acknowledge the phones now filming or the nurses now watching or the fact that Dr. Whitfield still hadn't returned from the back hallway. At 11:50 p.m., 2 police officers came through the entrance. They took one look at the situation and didn't move. A woman in scrubs, probably early 30s, definitely former military based on the way she held her shoulders, had a 270-pound man secured with the precision of someone who'd done this before. Professionally. With minimal injury. With the kind of control that suggested she knew exactly how much force to apply and where. "We've got him from here," one of the officers said. Rachel released pressure gradually, keeping her knee there until the first officer had cuffs ready. When she stood, she did it smoothly, hands clear, body language open. She'd released 5 detainees in her career, and every single one had been a high-risk moment. The moment after release was when people got desperate. He's definitely under the influence. Probably synthetic cathinones or a related compound. He came through screaming for pharmaceuticals about 7 minutes ago. No injuries to staff or patients. Vital signs appeared elevated but stable. He'll need medical clearance before booking. The officer stared at her. "You a doctor?" "Nurse," Rachel said. She was already moving backward, creating space, making herself small again. The construction worker was still watching her from the doorway with that look, the one that meant he'd recognized something. He needs to be monitored. His BP looked high. Heart rate elevated. The drug will wear off, but the crash could be rough. The officers got the attacker secured and were leading him out by 11:53 p.m. Thompson sat in the chair Rodriguez had brought him, breathing hard. 2 patients had already left. The one with the phone was still there, reviewing her footage. And in the nursing station, Dr. Whitfield emerged from the back hallway, straightening his tie like he'd just returned from a bathroom break instead of abandoning the crisis. He walked directly to the nurses' station where Rachel was already charting the incident with medical terminology that made Rodriguez glance over twice. Synthetic phenethylamine exposure. Acute agitation. Restrained without injury. Recommended monitoring for cardiovascular complications during withdrawal phase. That was, Whitfield started. "Just a nurse," Rachel said quietly, not looking up from the screen. Doing her job. She'd learned long ago that the most dangerous people in any room were the ones who said nothing when they could have said everything. The ones who kept their hand steady while being humiliated. The ones who moved through waiting rooms like ghosts and then, when the moment demanded it, moved like apex predators. The ones who understood that being underestimated was a gift that most people never learned to use. The construction worker walked past the nurse's station as Rachel was finishing the documentation. He didn't say anything. He just made a gesture, subtle, almost invisible, the kind of gesture you made when you recognized someone from a previous life. Someone from the teams. Someone who'd earned scars in the same places he had. Rachel's hand stayed steady. She didn't flinch. She didn't acknowledge. She simply continued typing, her worn combat boots hidden in a locker downstairs, her real identity locked away somewhere deeper than any flaw, her mission still running, her cover still solid. For now. The board meeting took place in the administrator's office at 6:38 a.m., before the hospital fully woke. Dr. Whitfield sat at the head of a mahogany table, his college roommate, now board chairman Gerald Pierce, flanking him with a leather folder already prepared. The morning light cut through the windows like something intended to expose everything. Whitfield's hands trembled slightly as he opened the folder. Not from fear. From rage that his carefully constructed narrative was being challenged by someone who was supposed to be invisible. He had called in favors. He had activated the network that had protected him for 17 years, the surgeons who owed him fellowship placements, the administrators whose children attended his country club, the hospital legal department that understood how institutional memory worked. The incident with the patient in the waiting room, Whitfield began, his voice carrying the false concern of someone who had rehearsed this performance, represents a severe breach of protocol. Unauthorized physical intervention. Excessive force. He slid photographs across the table, stills from security footage showing Rachel on top of the attacker, her knee positioned on his spine, her arm wrenched behind his back at an angle that looked, out of context, like brutality. "She's a temporary contract employee," Pierce added, his tone suggesting this explained everything. "No authority to engage in restraint procedures. That's a security function. She created liability the moment she touched him." What they didn't understand was that Rachel had moved not as a nurse but as something older and more precise. What they were calling excessive force was actually the minimum necessary application to neutralize a threat without permanent injury. She had chosen the spine lock over the neck break. She had chosen control over destruction. But institutional thinking doesn't reward restraint. It punishes deviation. Whitfield had already made the calls. At 5:13 a.m., before dawn, he had contacted the 3 hospitals where Rachel had listed references. His voice on those calls had been measured, professional, the tone of a concerned peer asking about a potential liability. "I'm just doing my due diligence," he had said. "There was an incident involving an authorized force. I want to understand her training background." The references went silent. Not refused. Silent. In the world of medical professionals, silence means everything. It means the person on the other end of the line heard the threat beneath the question. It means they understand that defending this particular nurse might cost them something. It means they are protecting themselves instead of protecting her. By 6:45 a.m., Whitfield had already spoken to hospital legal. By the time the board meeting convened, the decision was already made. Rachel Torres was being suspended pending investigation. The investigation would take weeks. The weeks would turn into months. And by then, her cover as an unremarkable temp nurse, her invisibility, her survival tool, would be shattered across every computer in the St. Michael's personnel department. The door to Rachel's assignment opened at 7:22 a.m. when the lead nurse told her to report to administration. No urgency. Just a request. Rachel followed the hallway she knew by heart, past the coffee station where Dr. Whitfield had humiliated her in front of the residents, past the trauma bay where she had just saved a life 4 hours earlier. The monitors were still recording that save. The chart notes were still there. The evidence of her competence, ironically, was the thing that would be used against her. Whitfield didn't fire her himself. That was strategic. He had legal send an administrator, a woman named Patricia Holt who had never once met Rachel, who had no context, who read from a prepared statement with the hollow authority of someone executing someone else's decision. Suspension pending investigation. You'll be notified of the outcome within 30 days. You're to turn in your badge and clear your locker immediately. You are not permitted to access patient information or hospital systems. Rachel listened to the words the way a soldier listens to artillery. She understood the structure of what was happening. She understood that this was institutional violence dressed in procedural language. She understood that the moment she had revealed her capability, the 3-layer closure, the knowledge of how to handle a weapons-grade threat, the way her hands had moved with precision, she had become a problem that needed to be contained. "I understand," she said quietly. "You'll receive details about the investigation timeline by email," Patricia continued, reading as if Rachel hadn't spoken. "Do you have any questions?" Rachel stood. The boots she was wearing, issued during her first deployment to Kandahar province, creased and worn and held together by routine, carried her out of that office. Down 3 flights of stairs. Into the employee locker room that smelled like stale deodorant and the particular loneliness of people who work nights and mornings, who exist in the margins where other people sleep. The locker was 247, 3rd row from the top. She spun the combination lock and opened it to find the life she had constructed in the last 2 months, an extra pair of scrubs, a water bottle, compression bandages, and at the bottom, the combat boot she had kept from her actual life. Not regulation. Not packed away in a box at her apartment or stored in a climate-controlled facility. Actually worn. Carried. The leather cracked from use, the sole scuffed from 100 types of ground, desert sand, mountain rock, the concrete of fobs where she had worked with soldiers whose names she could not speak and whose deaths she still counted in the part of her brain that never stopped counting. She picked them up. Held them. The weight of them was nothing compared to what they represented, the thing that couldn't be erased, the evidence that she had been someone else, somewhere else, someone who had earned the right to move the way she had moved in that waiting room. The locker was empty except for the boots. She carried them down the hallway, out through the main entrance where the San Antonio morning was already turning hot, where the air conditioning from the hospital doors made a sound like breathing. At 3:06 a.m., Rachel sat in an empty diner on Houston Street. The place was called Marie's, and it had been open 24 hours for 31 years, according to the sign. The waitress, a woman named Denise who worked the graveyard shift and never asked questions, had refilled her coffee 3 times without being asked. The cup was now cold. The reflection in the darkened window showed Rachel what she looked like when everything was stripped away, a woman in hospital scrubs, a pair of combat boots on the table beside her, hands wrapped around a cooling cup of something that was supposed to warm her. The mission was dead. The cartel-connected patient in the ICU was being monitored now by Dr. Whitfield's approved staff. The intelligence she was supposed to gather, the 3 phone calls, the visitor pattern, the medication interactions that would reveal whether the patient was maintaining contact with his handlers, all of that was now inaccessible to her. She was a liability. She was exposed. Her 6 months of invisibility, of moving through St. Michael's like a ghost, like someone nobody would ever look twice at, had been destroyed by the simple act of saving someone's life. Outside, rain had started. It came in sheets, the kind of rain that sounds like accusation, like the sky was angry about something and needed to say so. The raindrops hit the diner window and ran down in patterns that looked almost deliberate, like they were trying to form words. Rachel's eyes burned. Not from tears. From fatigue. From the particular exhaustion that comes from maintaining composure for so long that the composure becomes the only thing holding the body together. She picked up the combat boots. They were an object from another timeline, a different version of herself. Maybe Whitfield was right. Maybe temp nurses should stay temp. Maybe the only way to survive in this world was to stay unremarkable. To never lift anything heavier than protocol allowed. To let the tire iron fall and the patient die and the hierarchy remain unshaken. She held the boots over the edge of the table. The rain outside was loud enough that nobody would hear them hit the ground if she dropped them. Nobody would know. Nobody would care. She could walk out of this diner and disappear into San Antonio like she had disappeared into 1,000 other places. New name. New identity. New boots. Her phone was on the table. Screen dark. The Pentagon direct line had been disconnected when she took this assignment. Classified. Off books. No way to call in. No way to signal extraction. The operation was supposed to last 12 weeks. She was on week 22. And she had just exposed herself to save a man who would never know who she actually was. She was still holding the boots over the table edge when she heard it. Distant at first. Then clearer. The particular sound of a rotorcraft approaching from the northeast, low altitude, moving with purpose. The rhythm of it cut through the rain and the traffic and the ambient noise of a city that was supposed to be asleep but never fully was. In San Antonio, helicopters weren't unusual. Military helicopters, with that specific blade sound, at 3:13 a.m., coming in fast, those were different. Rachel's hand stopped. The boots descended slowly to the table. She set them down with the same care she used to handle surgical instruments. Placed them parallel to her coffee cup. And waited for what was about to happen next. The fluorescent lights blazed when the screens flickered. 1. 2. Then all of them at once. Every monitor in St. Michael's lobby switched to the same image. A military photograph. Dress blues. Master Chief Petty Officer Rachel Torres stared back at the crowded waiting room, her uniform crisp, her eye steady as a marksman's scope focused downrange. The headline burned in white text, "Missing Combat Medic Found." 6-month classified assignment ends in Texas hospital. The lobby froze. Patients mid-text. Families looking up from chairs. The anchor's voice cut through the speakers like a command being read at formation. Master Chief Petty Officer Rachel Torres, a decorated Special Forces combat medic attached to JSOC Task Force 121, was reported missing 6 months ago during a classified operation in support of ongoing counterterrorism objectives. Sources confirm she was embedded undercover to investigate suspected trafficking networks operating within institutional settings. Her location has been confirmed as St. Michael's Medical Center in San Antonio. She is alive. She is secure. Rachel stood by the vending machine. Coffee still warm in her hand. The lobby air shifted. People turned. Some stared at the screens. Some stared at her. She didn't move. She didn't blink. The cup remained steady against her palm. The construction worker from Trauma Bay 3 was waiting for discharge paperwork. He stood. His hand went to his chest in a half salute, then stopped. His voice was barely audible across the lobby, one string of words spoken like a password at a checkpoint, Reaper 6. Her call sign. The name only 6 people in the world still remembered. The security guard, the one who'd served in the Navy, the one who'd watched the tire iron attack without moving, straightened his spine. His shoulders rolled back. His voice didn't ask, didn't suggest. It commanded. Master Chief Petty Officer on deck. The announcement carried through the lobby like a gavel strike. Staff turned. Visitors stood. The words hung in the recycled air. The doors opened. Not the automatic ones. The main entrance. Cold air rushed in, carrying the smell of rain on hot asphalt, and a 2-star general in dress uniform walked through like he owned the building. His boots echoed on tile. His uniform bore the insignia of United States Northern Command. Behind him, 2 officers in Navy dress blues and 4 federal agents with badges clipped to their belts. The general approached the center of the atrium. His presence compressed the space. When he spoke, his voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Master Chief Petty Officer Rachel Elizabeth Torres. I'm reading your combat record aloud in front of your witnesses because this institution needs to hear it. Because this community needs to hear it. Because your service deserves acknowledgement where you've been invisible. He paused. The atrium held its breath. Bronze Star for Vela. Marja Province, 2019. Direct cardiac massage performed on a fellow operator under sustained small arms fire. That operator went home. Silence. Bronze Star. 2021. Combat casualty evacuation under hostile conditions. 2 wounded extracted. 0 additional casualties. The general's voice remained level. Clinical. A recitation of facts that shattered lives and rebuilt institutions. Bronze Star. 2023. Emergency field surgery. 17 lives saved under active engagement. 17. Rachel's coffee cup remained steady. Her jaw showed nothing. Silver Star. Direct action raid, Helm and Province. Operator critically wounded during assault phase. Master Chief performed emergency resuscitation in a 4-minute window while team provided overwatch. That operator commands his own unit today. The news cameras recorded every word. 4 of them. Red lights burning like eyes. 2 purple hearts for wounds sustained in combat. 23 operational deployments. 412 hours of direct engagement time. This woman has bled for this country in ways most people will never understand. The general's eyes found Dr. Whitfield standing frozen behind the nurse's station, his face the color of spent ash. Dr. Whitfield. I'm going to be very clear. Assaulting a service member on active assignment is a federal crime. Conspiracy to remove her from her post during an active investigation is another. Weaponizing institutional authority to silence classified personnel is a third. The general's voice carried the weight of armor plating. Your termination was approved by the hospital board 10 minutes ago. The board vote was unanimous. 13 minutes ago, the FBI initiated a formal investigation into your conduct. You are no longer employed here. You will surrender your credentials, your building access, and your license pending federal review. You will do this now. In front of your staff. In front of the cameras. In front of the witnesses. Whitfield's mouth moved. No sound emerged. His hand shook. He reached for the desk to steady himself and missed. A stool clattered backward. A nurse caught it before it fell. The agents approached. Not running. Not rushing. The methodical pace of people who'd done this before. One of them produced a folder, thick, sealed, marked with classification stamps. Whitfield's hands trembled as he was led toward the exit, his access badge already removed from his belt, his name already being removed from the hospital directory being updated on screens across the building. Rachel watched him pass. She didn't speak. Her coffee was still warm. Months later, someone spotted Dr. Whitfield at Pierce County Community College in Tacoma, Washington, teaching CPR to high school students. His name tag read, Steve. He flinched when anyone called him doctor. His salary was $18,400 a year. He lived in a studio apartment on the ground floor. He took the bus to work. Nobody knew him. Nobody asked him for anything. He was invisible. Completely. Utterly. Invisible. 8 months after that, Rachel Torres stood in the Pentagon in her dress blues. The ceremony was small. Classified. Only the people who needed to know attended. 13 personnel, all with top-secret security clearance. A 5-star admiral read citations. A chaplain offered a brief prayer. And when it was finished, when the official part was done, they escorted her to a back corridor where a single spotlight illuminated a glass display case. Her worn combat boots sat inside a shadow box. The leather cracked from desert heat and exposure. The soles worn thin from 17,000 kilometers of patrol. They were mounted on a stand with a brass plaque, Master Chief Petty Officer Rachel Elizabeth Torres. JSOC Task Force 121. Her service. Her sacrifice. Never forgotten. She looked at them for a long time. Those boots had walked through Marja when the temperature hit 48 degrees Celsius. They'd crossed rooftops in Sanjin Valley. They'd carried her through a 6-month operation where nobody knew her name, where every person she saved thought she was just a traveling nurse with steady hands and no history. They'd been her only connection to who she really was. And now they were retired. Preserved. Honored. She turned away from the case and walked back toward her new assignment. The tattoo on her left shoulder blade, the JSOC insignia, remained hidden under her dress uniform. Some things stayed classified. Some identities remained secret. Some warriors never got the spotlight. And that was precisely why they were good at what they did. But the world had seen her now. The cameras had recorded her face. The footage had circled the globe. Every military veteran who'd been underestimated, every operator who'd been dismissed, every person who'd learned to move invisible through hostile spaces, they'd all seen a woman stand in a hospital lobby and get acknowledged. And that mattered. That changed something. Not everything. But something. The trembling wasn't fear. It was restraint. The restraint it took to stand beside her boots and not remember every person she'd lost. The restraint it took to walk past Whitfield's empty office and not feel satisfaction. The restraint it took to accept a promotion back to active duty and say yes when she wanted to say nothing. The restraint it took to keep being the person she'd built herself to be, even now that everyone knew exactly who that was. Scars tell stories. Some are written on skin. Some are written in institutional memory. Some are written in the hearts of people who survived because one quiet woman with steady hands decided to save them. In the end, that was the only rank that mattered. Hit that like button if you appreciate the nurses and healthcare workers in your life. Drop a comment if you've ever worked in medicine or know someone who has. Subscribe and let's see what happens next.